Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. Well, as a community of parents here tonight, I suspect that we have a lot of differences. There's a lot of different reasons. You took time to come out here, and I know your time is very valuable. For example, be home tonight building your Tom Brady voodoo dolls to cripple so my Eagles have a chance on Sunday. So I don't know where you guys are on that, so we'll just leave that lie where it is. But in any event, I also know that there are very among us. Am I doing something wrong? I'm going to bring you a new mic. Okay. I'll keep trying this until you get the new one. Okay. I also know there's a very powerful between us as well. There are really three bonds. First, singular mission. And it's important that we talk about the concept of mission because a lot of us kind of screw up the mission by getting caught in the details, the strategies and tactics we think are important. Really, what is our mission as parents? That what we're hoping we do is sorry about this, to raise our kids to be like happy young adults. Isn't that what it's all about? Okay. And it's amazing how with such a wonderful, noble mission in mind, we can screw it up by getting caught in details that have diminishing returns that actually destroy our chances of pulling off that mission. So that's kind of the overview, is talking about why are we here tonight. Now, I know our differences, excuse me while we change out the mic.
Sorry, friends. Keep the mic.
It's an Irish Catholic thing, but in any event. So, the differences are, I think what dragged you out here are things, worries about your kids, to include anxiety, depression, suicide, drug use, the opioid crisis. So a lot of us have individuated kind of concerns that motivate us. But you'd be surprised about the bonds, the similarities, the first being our mission of raising kids into happy adulthood. And we don't define happy as yippee, yippee, joy, joy. Happy is really about feeling connected to the world, having purpose and passion, having a sense of self. And that is really the magic formula we're trying to go after as we raise kids today. And as you'll see, we've sort of lost the recipe by trying to foster the mission too much, too hard, thinking that we can manipulate things to make it happen as opposed to just tweaking the child that is presented to us by Mother Nature or God or whoever you think put you in this predicament that you're in at the moment. The second bond has to do with expectations, and that we have to be very careful about our expectations. When my son Ross was born, he was brilliant. He actually truly is a genius. And when he was a baby, I did that stupid baby IQ test and so forth, and I was thinking, boy, Rhodes Scholar, this kid's going to be amazing. And as he got older, I was thinking, well, maybe he could graduate from a nice state school. And then he got older, and we fell back to alive at 25. No criminal record, that's a success sort of a thing. So our expectations can also crash and get caught up in how we interact with the kid, because often we really see our children as extensions of ourselves, our own ego, and we sort of project that into them, as opposed to understanding that our mission is to help them define their own identity, to become who they are, but keep them alive as they go through that process. It's a tricky thing. The next thing that we have in common is that in terms of the drug crises that are out there, the different drugs and those different mental health issues we went over, they all relate to one common enemy that all of us can share in terms of being worried about our kids, and that enemy is stress. Guys, all of those disorders all relate ultimately back to stress. But stress isn't the simple thing we think it is. Stress is a weird irony. Kids who have too much stress, certainly we always worry about those, and you've experienced tragedies with kids pushing themselves too hard. But we've also forgotten about the other end of that bell curve of stress. Kids that have quit, that have too little stress, that are unable to engage with the world at all. And the amazing thing is kids at both ends of the spectrum have almost exactly the same rates of dysfunction, and terrible things happen on both ends of the extreme. The bell curve, the sweet spot, is in the middle. And that's what we have to try to do, is to remember every kid is a different book, and they have to find that sweet spot of challenge. I'm going to lay that out more specifically through tonight when we talk about trying to find those things with kids, because ultimately we're talking about a concept called resilience. And resilience is also something that is widely misunderstood. So what I'm hoping to do tonight is to let you know about those crises that are going on out there, the bad news stuff, and tell you what the research clearly says is our salvation. And that is focusing on the resilience of the child, not the batting average, not the GPA. And it's interesting the factors that go into building resilience. They're often not what we think. Before I get to all that, I need to get some information from you guys in terms of where you are in terms of parenting history, how many scars you have. Could I get a show of hands? How many here have their eldest child age 25 or over? Okay, I'll be calling on you to witness a few things. Eldest child 18 to 24. Okay. Eldest child 14 to 17. Oh, that brings them out, doesn't it? Anybody I haven't gotten to? Eldest child is 13, 12. Oh my goodness. We got a lot of newbies in the audience. Look, if you guys want to leave, I fully understand. Sometimes you don't want to hear about the car wrecks and so forth. Well, since you're here, I'll give you a good clue from the beginning. Beware of the parent karma thing. You see, when we're raising our kids when they're small, we think they're a lot of work and it's really tough. It ain't nothing like adolescence, just to let you know. So do not do the parent karma thing. What is that? Well, you're kind of bumping along with your first child, and she's 8, 9, 10, and you guys are best buddies. You go shopping together, you get the same outfits, those little sandwiches in Manhattan and all that kind of stuff, yeah. And you're so tight and close, and it's so wonderful. You're thinking, boy, this is so easy. And then you hear these noises outside, and the two of you look out the window, and there's your next-door neighbor with her 16-year-old daughter who's shrieking and cursing and hurling lawn ornaments at her mother. You're tempted to have a thought. I want you to not have it. What is the thought? I'd never let my daughter talk to me like that. No, don't go there. No, just say a prayer, light a candle, whatever you do. Do not judge, because it'll bite you somewhere you don't want to be bitten. Until you've walked in those moccasins, you really don't know. Take notes, watch what the veterans are doing, but don't get your expectations up too high. A couple of other points of business. Yes, this is the ugliest tie you've ever seen in your life. I had a couple people inquire about it. You're very polite up here in Basking Ridge. They say, that's an unusual tie, Anybody see the characters on there? There's anybody? Rocky and Bullwinkle, yeah, Moose and Squirrel, yeah, some people still know that. What's the story? Ross, my beloved son, doing great, by the way. Check my text. When he was 13, he went through the crash. You know the crash? Your kid thinks you're great, But Ross used to think I was like a little funny. He thought I was smart, thought I was a little athletic, all like that. And then one night, I must have had a massive stroke, and nobody told me. Lost it all. Anyway, so we were in the stroke phase when I was the dumbest thing since sliced white bread. And at our Christmas gathering, big family, he presented this tie, a big humiliation thing. Like, I looked all over the city for a tie that would match my father's wardrobe and his taste. And everybody laughed at my expense, But don't feel bad for me. I got them back. Ever since, I wear it everywhere I go. I was on the Today Show, and the guy said, Dr. Bradley, that tie's giving the camera a problem. And I said, yeah. And my son Ross picked that out. Isn't that real? You can't beat him anymore. Sarcasm fills in well, I found. But and secondly, I'll beg your pardon for swigging on the water. The throat is a little sore from over speaking. I am in better shape than I look, apparently, according to my daughter's comments. Sarah is our adopted daughter. Sarah, no joke, has PTSD. We were her fifth home in her first year of life. She was born, talking about this topic, she was born cocaine and opioid addicted. And she was unmanageable. They kept returning her from foster homes. So we adopted her, and my wife, being who she is, said, this one's staying because nobody else will take her. So anyway, we adopted her. She has a PTSD thing. From all that, you imagine 4 families disappearing on you in the first year of your life. So then comes 9/11, and I had flown out of Newark that day, and at our school, we did lose a couple of parents at the school she went to. And I was on the list that went out on the school somehow. And she heard the teachers talking about so-and-so, and Dr. Bradley died in the crash. Kids have the radar hearing. So she just fell completely apart. So she always gets weirded out before I leave on speaking trips, especially if I'm flying. So we had a tradition, I'd always snuggle her to sleep before I was leaving. And I was snuggling her to sleep a few years ago, and she turned to me and said, Daddy, are you going to die soon? And I was thinking stress and terrorism. And by the way, this works on the kids, the shootings and all that stuff that we love to blare in front of everybody 24/7. So I was thinking, oh, here we go, PTSD thing. And I said, Sarah, I do not think I'm going to die soon. I'll do everything I can to try to keep that from happening, okay? She said, okay, Daddy. And then I asked the question. I said, Sarah, can I ask you why you asked me that? And Sarah said, and I quote, well, Dad, because, just like, look at you. There's your next tip. Be very careful what you ask a teenager. They think you want the truth. So, assuming that Sarah's prophecies are incorrect, we'll get through the night. As you heard, one of my many former failed careers was as an Army officer. Actually, it was great. I learned a lot, but I felt that there was a breach of contract thing on the brochures. You ever notice how great the guys look? They're all tan and buff. Uniforms are spotless, and it turns out they make you go into really horrible places, and there's rain and muck, and there's people that shoot at you once in a while. Did you know that? I complained, and they just kind of laughed at me, but so I said, this isn't for me, and I left when my tour was done. However, since then, I've worked with vets because I like to dovetail the two things. I feel a lot of connection with the military. And I worked with vets who had gone through trauma in the various wars we've had. There were 2 vets. I want to share their story with you because it relates to your kids. The first one, they both had equally traumatic injuries. They each lost a leg, most of a leg, one right, one left. First call, you would predict. They said he won't get out of bed, won't see his family. He's promised to kill himself at the first opportunity. And, we got to do something. So the second call was about 14 months later, and they started off, the same guy says, Mike, we got this guy, he's an amputee. And I said, let me guess, he won't get out of bed. He said, no, get this, we can't keep him in bed. He's doubling the PT that has been set up for him. We think he's going to injure himself. He won't stop moving. He's on the floor all the time. He's counseling the other amputees. He's demanding to see all these people. And he wants a runner's prosthetic. Now, when you lose a leg, it's really hard to learn how to walk again. You start with a walker's prosthetic, and that's like amazingly difficult. Running is like Star Wars kind of thing. Some guys do that. And he said, no, I'm not doing the walk. I want the runner's prosthetic. I used to be a runner, so get the runner guy in here. So I was talking to him, and it was kind of as I was pulling a lot of this data together about resilience. And I said, can I ask you a question? How is it that you can be so like positive and upbeat? I was worried, are you covering all up, all that pain and so forth? And he said, man, I know what you're talking about. He said, I have the pain. He said, I wake up in the middle of the night, not to be too gross, and get sick because I've got killer pain from a leg that's not there anymore. It's a syndrome called phantom pain, a recent amputation. He said, yeah, I hurt, and I feel horrible. I lost a whole lot. He said, but I gave that frickin' war, my leg, I'm not giving it another inch of my life. So if you want to help me, you get the VA guy get in here because I want an exemption and I want the runner's prosthetic and I want to go to law school and yada, yada, yada. What was the difference between those two people? If you think about it, the same horrific injury, right? Incredible, life-changing, and these were kids in essence. They were like 19, 20, 21 when I worked with them. They're essentially teenagers. And two radically different responses. The difference between those two people is something called resilience. And how do we define resilience? Well, a good metaphor is to think about two boats on a sea, and there's a huge storm, and a giant wave overwhelms both boats and they go down. And one boat keeps going down, and for some reason the other boat bobs back up to the surface. Resilience is not that the boat that survived missed the storm or missed the wave, but had some kind of a capacity to respond. It experienced the stress and the trauma and was able to bounce back and to reclaim itself. So that's the concept. And these two guys kind of burned in my head at the time where resilience research was pulling together. And so then we would do research on those guys. And we came up with a set of factors that tell us that certain assets that we can develop in kids are very protective against things like anxiety, depression, suicidal behavior, drug abuse, very protective factors. And that's what we're here to talk about tonight. Now, that may seem like a dramatic statement to make, but guys, I've been in the military, I've seen some things, and I've worked with teenagers for 3 decades, more than 3 decades now. And guys, I see your kids as in a war. I do. I see the stresses that they're subjected to, the things that they deal with, the changes in their culture. They got drafted, by the way. They didn't volunteer for this. It just sort of happened. And I can back up that radical statement by showing you the numbers that our kids are suffering in similar numbers to vets coming out of the military with depression, anxiety, drug abuse, and suicide. Very similar numbers. So I'm here to help you, to help your kid to be that second vet and talk about what goes into that magical potion that we need to start to address with our kids. Couple of things about resilience. First, again, you must remember that resilience does not occur with kids who are bubble wrapped. Keeping kids protected from all stress is a disaster. The idea is to let them experience certain amounts of stress and be able to develop the assets and the skills to respond to the stress. So what am I talking about there? The parents that lawyer up because the teacher is being unfair to the kid, or they won't let the cop discipline the kid. It was funny because I had a recent case, a little complicated, but the bottom line was I was saying, officer, this could really be helpful if you would go visit this family and just explain to them that, what the kid did was not right and they really need to own it because the kid needs to go before a judge. He needs to have these consequences psychologically. We'll talk about consequences and how that works. And the cop laughed at me. He said, Dr. Bradley, he said, where have you been? He said, maybe back in the day, people would listen. He said, today I'd be thrown off the porch because I'm daring to criticize their child. A lot of teachers quit criticizing your children. Ross would come home all angry about a teacher, and maybe the teacher was completely out of line. That might be true. But it had to be his problem to handle it. Because if we jump in and try to bubble wrap kids and solve their problems, we cripple them, as you're going to see. They have to experience pain and failure in the proper dose to become strong. The great news about resilience is that it is not a genetically inherited trait. People have confused this with something that's another aspect of psychology called grit that Pamela Duckworth talks about at University of Pennsylvania. Grit is a different concept. It does appear to be a genetic thing, and that's kind of a stick-to-it-ism. But resilience is different. Resilience we can teach. You can foster it in your kids. I tell parents, think of it as kind of martial arts, defensive martial arts, to handle the threats around them. And it's stuff that you start doing on the ride home from the delivery, from the hospital, and you continue throughout your time with your child. So I'm going to try to convince you of all this in 4 parts. First, we're going to talk about the brain inside your teenager's head. Yes, there is a brain there. Stop smirking. No, it's not the brain for which you had hoped. Teenage brains are very much a work in progress. Now, you guys have had some of this before, I assume, so I'll do it quickly. Yes, no, maybe so. Short course is teenagers are crazy. Why? Because Mother Nature is transforming their brain from a child brain to an adult brain, which is really cool. It's amazing when we study what goes on. Fascinating, the process, as long as it's not your own kid. If it's your kid, all hell breaks loose. And the reason is that she starts in the back of the head and works forward. What's in the back of the head? Things like impulses, passion, sex, crazy acting out behaviors, love of danger, love of risk, all that stuff is back there. And we all have that, right? In the front of the brain is what we call the committee. That's the prefrontal cortex, or the adult brain. So your adult brain grabs hold of these impulses and says, you know, that's a bad idea. Some guy cuts you off in the parking lot and he wants to fist fight you and you want to fight him. Well, your adult brain in a nanosecond says, yo, you want to die over 10 feet of asphalt? Like, let it go. So you have this committee up front. Kids have the first part in young adolescence, the impulses. They don't care about what the outcome is, and they don't have the committee to hold them back. So that's where we see these crazy behaviors from them that make people worry that the kid is bipolar. Once a month I get a case, family comes in and says the kid needs meds, he's bipolar, and I talk to him and I say, I got good news and bad news. Good news is he ain't bipolar. Bad news is he's a teenager. Good luck, thanks for coming by. You can pay on the way out. Those aspects of the teen brain also are anti-resilience factors. And they're anti-resilience because they often create an identity in the kid where they feel they're crazy. And they start to believe that's who they are. And they don't even think about alternative ways of being. And as parents, we often reinforce that image of them as being nuts and out of control as a permanent thing by using punishments versus consequences. I'm going to say that about 100 times through the presentation, and I will define that for you when we get to the end. But we have to remember that they are temporarily insane, and you have to treat them as if they have a temporary seizure disorder. Be very careful about your expectations and don't take their behavior personally. If they had epilepsy and they had a seizure, would you yell at them to stop doing that? What's wrong with you? No, you give them a safe space, you do whatever you can to protect them, and you ride it out. You wait till that passes. It's kind of the same with the adolescent brain. The second thing we're going to go into is the world around our kids, which is truly terrifying. Guys, this is not the world you remember. And if you are thinking you know what it's like for your kid because you were a teenager once, forget it. You're coming from a different cosmos. And I'll explain some of those things. I think you'll find that terrifying. Third, we'll get to the empowering part. What do you do about this stuff? And that's where we go over a set of strategies and tactics to build resilience in kids. And I think you'll find that kind of the good news part. When you see it, it's not all that hard. It's just kind of changing up the way you do this gig. Finally, we'll get to the best part of the evening, which is Q&A. Your questions, hopefully my answers. A couple of rules on Q&A. First of all, I am Irish by birth, not by choice. In my family, Q&A stands for quarrels and arguments. So if you want to challenge me and say, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard, and, where'd you get your degree from, and blah, 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 please bring it. It makes for a much better evening. Usually means I'm not being clear, or you know something I don't know. And that's why I still do these things at this ripe old age. Everywhere I go, I always get a gem. It's really weird. Somebody says something or gives me an idea or talks about another expert somewhere. And it really works. So please feel free to disagree. Second, contrary to the myth, there is such a thing as a dumb question. Do you all know what the dumb question is? It's the one you don't ask. That's really dumb in every sense of the word. I guarantee if you have a question, other folks have the same question, but not all of us are brave enough to raise our hand and talk into the microphone. And if we don't get to your question, and we probably won't because I talk too much all the time, but if we don't get to your question, get to me on the website. You can send me letters there, and I will answer you and try to get to the things you need through the website. So feel free to reach out there. Okay, so I mentioned that kids are crazy, right? And I told you why. They're going through this renovation, which creates neurologic chaos. Literally, certain functions are getting packed up and shipped to other parts of the brain, and all this wiring is going out and connecting. Did you ever renovate your kitchen or renovate your house? Was that a fun experience? Contractor said, we'll be out of here in 2 weeks. We did a house. From stem to stern, we did a house, and our contractor said, probably 10 weeks, 12 weeks. We just about finished, and that's 12 years that we've been at this, because it just goes on and on. It gets frustrating. Remember the dust and the dirt, and the switches don't work, and all that stuff. Workmen showing up at 5:30 in the morning and all that. That's what goes on inside a teenager's head, and it's very unsettling to them, guys. Very unsettling. They used to be real sedate and simple creatures before they hit adolescence. And a lot of what you get in arrogant behavior from teenagers is defensive. They don't feel that they're sane, and they're so reactive to criticism because they can't explain what's going on in their heads. Again, it's the seizure sort of a metaphor. They actually feel terribly unsettled, and in response, they'll act cool. The girls try to set the hierarchy, the social thing, and the boys try to get all tough and bad and gangsterish and so forth. That's all defensiveness that you see in people that really are scared inside. They're fragile. So try to have a little empathy for their situation. When does this start? It typically starts 11, 12, 13. By the way, it seems to start earlier and earlier, and we're not quite sure why. Like girls are going through their first menses earlier and earlier, and we don't know why. They thought it was hormones in the milk, and that's been shot down. Believe it or not, the leading theory now is the culture that pounds them through the electronics with adult issues. Yeah, that's the converging theory that may fall apart at some point, but it's sort of telling them to be grown-ups at age 11 with sex and drugs and violence and all that stuff. And that may be a trigger or one of the triggers that's causing this. So it starts 11, 12, 13. Girls start down the path about 18 months ahead of the boys. By the way, does that ring a few bells, ladies? Do you remember being in middle school, co-ed class, looking around the classroom? What did you see? What were the girls doing? They were like taking notes, raising their hands. Remember? Yeah, being kind of cooperative. What were the boys doing in 6th grade and 7th grade? The same class. Yeah, spitting on the floor, throwing spitballs, pulling hair, right? Remember that? Remember looking around that room, ladies, and had that sinking feeling that, oh my God, one day I have to pick a mate out of this gene pool? How did those 6th grade boys look to you? Not so good. So what classroom did you start to hang out at? The 8th grade, the 9th grade. From forever, parents have screamed at their daughters, why do you have to chase the older boys? Why can't you find a boy your own age? You put the brain scans up at 6th grade girl and 8th grade boy are very similar, much more so than the kids the same age. And it equalizes out later. But for those years, that's why you have that differential. So it doesn't mean it's a bad girl. It just means that she just can't believe the boys in her 6th grade class. It just make her sick. By the way, which would you say are harder to raise, girls or boys? Veteran parents, which are harder? Yeah, it's like 94% of respondents say girls are harder. I know the boys can be tough, but the girls always. I was part of that research. I interviewed this one dad that raised both. I asked him which are harder, and he said, well, let me think about it. When my son was 14, he was a bit of a maniac. He'd have these explosions, and he punched holes in the wall. He kicked the door off the gym one time. And a couple of years after that, our daughter turned 14, and boy, did we miss our son. They're very different in terms of how they handle this transition. Boys tend to, we say, go into the cave. They sort of disappear for a year. Typically, they dress in black. They'll come downstairs, they don't smell so good, they wolf down the food, they glare at you, and they go back to their room. Yeah, it's just what they do at that age. But the girls are a little different. They're kind of more interactive with their teenage angst. I've heard this one story so many times around the country, it's amazing. You'll probably finish it for me. That previously sedate, very cooperative, calm, logical daughter, suddenly you're in the family room and you hear her in the kitchen in front of your pantry. And in your pantry you got what, $6,000 worth of food? And she's banging things and slamming things and cursing. And you're like, oh my God, she's having a breakdown. And she's saying, oh, you've been there, huh? Yeah. And you're dumb enough to get involved in that conversation. Because you're a newbie. So you go in there, you go in there and you're saying, honey, what's wrong? There's nothing to eat. So, honey, there's lots of things. No, there's not. This is all food my creepy little brother likes. You never get anything I like. You don't care about me anymore. I hate this family. Calm down, sweetie. Let's take a look. Look, we got tuna fish. You love tuna. I'll make you a nice bowl of tuna fish. What do you say? I do not kill living creatures to sustain myself. Well, you killed a hell of a lot of them last week. I'm a militant vegan. Well, cool. That's great. I respect that. That's true. Let's see. Look at this. Vegan pasta. I'll make you a nice bowl of pasta. What do you say? Pasta. Pasta. I know what you want. You want me to eat pasta so I'll get fat and I won't have a boyfriend. I hate you. Ah! And 20 minutes later comes downstairs and says, Mom, did you see my soccer shoes? I can't find them. Woo, and you're still trying to heal the wounds of the previous explosion, and they're staring at you because they don't know. They forgot it. That was years ago that they had that outburst. Yeah, it gets like that. They're not bipolar. They're teenagers. That's just the way it goes. The key thing you need to know, and back to the darker side of the evening, is that their reward circuits go squampers. What are reward circuits? It's a set of wires in the brain that help us feel good. So how does it work? Well, like you may go outside tomorrow and it could be a beautiful, crisp morning and birds are chirping in the sunshine and you just stand there and say, God, this is beautiful. And you get a little thing of reward in the brain like, oh, I'm so glad I'm alive and see this and this is so cool. Well, their reward circuits are on steroids. So things that would give a certain amount of reward to an adult can give exponentially more reward to a child, to a teenager. What kind of things? Taking risks, driving at 110 miles an hour sort of thing. Drugs give amazing rewards to teen brains. Sex, ice cream, being up late at night, doing the drama on the texting screens and so forth. These wild they give rewards. Kids. Why do we worry about that? Well, I'm going to postpone that discussion because when we get to drugs, you'll see why we worry about that. Because these things precondition teen brains to become addicted. And these are things that are new in our culture, a bunch of things that relate to the opioid crisis. So I'll hold you in suspense on that for a second. Another thing about teenagers is they don't go to sleep when the rest of us do. They stay up later. That's actually Mother Nature. She has programmed teenagers to stay up later than adults, and that's probably from our days back on the plains. The teenagers, back 500,000 years ago, teenagers were the alarm systems of the herds because they had the best eyesight and the best hearing. That's the leading theory on this. So they would stay up most of the night to guard the herd. And then as it gets to dawn, teenagers would go to sleep, and we see it in animal studies still today, and then the young and the older wake up. Does that sound like Saturday and Sunday morning in your house? Yeah, it's the same behavior. But who do we typically get up first in the morning and off to school? The teenagers. Is that still happening in these schools? Yeah, we're turning it around. It's a monstrous logistical challenge. But we've turned it around in a couple of school districts, and the results are stunning. When we bring the teens in, just giving them another hour of sleep, it's amazing. Academic issues get much better. Test scores are better. Behavioral issues go way down. Health issues go way up. Do you know how many hours of sleep your kid's supposed to be getting? Yeah, 9 to 10, and that's an average. You know how many hours the American teenager is getting these days? About 6. Slightly less than 6 is the last number I saw. Think about that one fact. I know, let's do an experiment. I'm going to do psych exams on all you guys tonight. I'm going to line you up, we'll do a psych exam, see how you're doing. And then we're going to cut your sleep by 1/3, and we'll let you go 3 months. And then we'll bring you back and we'll do another evaluation. How are you going to be? Yeah, a little ADHD, depressed, anxious, maybe life doesn't look like it's worth living. Have you ever remembered being that exhausted? Can you remember that? It's good, remember when the baby first came, I remember my eyeballs hurting when the babies were young. I never experienced that in the military, but I remember my eyeballs hurt because I wasn't getting any sleep. So, yeah, think about that and fighting through the fog in the morning. Remember that? And nothing looked good except maybe not being alive. And drugs look good. Drinking goes up. Pot use goes up with adults who are also sleep deprived. Those things look really good. So if I become king of the world, still waiting for the call, the first rule will be teenagers get 10 hours of sleep. And I'll essentially be out of business. I'll be retiring. I'm very serious because a lot of this insanity and death and dying will go away by letting them sleep the way they were built to sleep. So enough of that. A second anti-resilience factor is the world around them. The world around them has kind of gone off the tracks in a bunch of ways that attack resilience. We look at these things in terms of expectations that have gotten extreme. Expectations of academics and athletics and socialization. The athletic expectations, I played a little basketball back in the day. I couldn't make the team here. I know I couldn't, because your team here is what used to be college, maybe D2, in my day. Because your kids have been working at this in these specialized sport camps since age 4 and 5, and they're amazingly good. I go to the games and say, oh my God, these kids are great. They're unbelievable. But what's happened is that it's become a grind. I had a couple of kids I worked with. One was an all-state soccer star, and he was offered a whole bunch of scholarships to college, and he turned them down. His parents went wild, you got to make him take the scholarships. And he said, they taught me how to hate my sport. They taught me how to hate the sport. And it stuck in my head. This is like a pro saying, I'm burnt out. I just can't play this game anymore. I'm done. And, he went back and found his love by playing club, pickup, and coaching. So, he reignited his passion. But it was so poignant. And I see so many of these kids. Academics, the same thing. Kids are taking on courses they're not built to do. These AP courses, even honors courses, it's taken on a life of its own. You know where it came from? It was about 20 years ago. A team of economists wrote this study, which was flawed, and they said, you got to get your kids into elite schools. You get to an elite school, kind of guaranteed to do well in life. And that set off this whole insanity about these elite schools and the prep programs and beating kids. Well, we've done other studies since, and guess what? It ain't the school, it's the kid. The research was flawed. They actually apologized, to their credit. 2 of the 3 wrote a thing saying, sorry, we're really sorry we did that. We hadn't thought it out. We didn't do the proper research. Guys, it's not the elite school. And getting A's in AP classes in high school, you know, the relationship between that and what we call life happiness is either neutral or negative. In other words, the kids that punish themselves at these early ages can develop all these secondary illnesses, the anxiety, the depression, suicidal thought, drug abuse. You know what the big rage on college campuses is now? What's the drug? Adderall. Yeah, ADHD medications. Well, they're doing the other drugs too to relax, but the kids are wild with ADHD is methamphetamine, ADHD medications for the most part, because they're all hyped up trying to do this incredible task they're not really ready to do. So they're using these drugs to alter their performance, like steroids with athletes sort of stuff. It's just gotten crazy. If it worked, if it had something to do with life happiness, I don't know, maybe, but it doesn't. It goes in the other direction. Again, excessive expectations. And the social aspects, well, you know, you guys have seen it. The daughters and now the boys are caught up in it, trying to manage perceptions of often 100 individuals. How many friends did you have in high school that you really cared about? Yeah, exactly. You know, I had a couple. How many bullies did you have in high school? I had one. It was a tough school. There was occasional fights, but there's only one real bully. We worked it out. It was John McMahon. He would come down the hall. He'd see me. I'd punch myself in the face and fall down. We done here, John? Yeah, we're done here. And he became a probation officer, by the way. Isn't that funny? But in any event, I thought it was, you know, not fun. It's nothing compared to the stress your kids have. Your kids are like the PR, public relations press secretary for a senator or whatever, constantly monitoring the social buzz, the network, and having to respond to every threat, every nuance, every rumor. It's nuts. Where is it coming from? The electronics. The electronics have changed everything. By electronics, I mean screens, smartphones, the tablets, the computers, and so forth. We had no idea what we were unleashing when we handed kids this stuff. And every year that goes by, we get more research that says that was a huge mistake. A friend of mine, peer, named Jean Twenge, wrote a book, and I may be misquoting the title, but I read her article, and I think the title is, Have Smartphones Destroyed a Generation of Teenagers? And you can get the preface article in the New Yorker, I think it was like November. I think the book's due out in March. Jean is not some radical, you know, bomb thrower kind of person. She's a serious researcher, scientist, and she's come up with data that are stunning about what this has done to our kids, the screens. She's found out that a lot of the good news we were flouting turns out to be bad news. What's the good news in the teen risk research? One, they're not having as many pregnancies. Unintended pregnancy is way down. And all the sex ed people were saying, see, you know, we're doing a good job, this is terrific. Jean found out the reason that it's down, we don't have any young children here, right? That they're not having sex, they're having cyber sex in much greater numbers, and it's casual cyber sex. It's, you know, with anybody they pick up online. They're not in the world experiencing, not that they should be having sex or certainly risk sex or unintended pregnancies, but they're not learning how to do relationships. They can't order takeout food. They can fill out the form, but if they have to call and make an order, they get paralyzed. Have you had that happen? Mom, you got to talk. Yeah, they're paralyzed at ordering food in restaurants. So they're also crashing cars less. And we said, oh, great, driver's ed is really working. Jean pulled it apart and said, no, it's because they're driving less. They're much happier having their parents drive. They don't want to deal with the hassle of learning how to drive. In other words, Jean is saying, and I agree, they're retreating into the screens at the exclusion of the real world and learning how to deal with that. The more they retreat, the less they are able to handle the real world. And they do get all bound up. They're not building resilience. All the things they get pummeled with on those screens are incredibly powerful. If you want a metaphor for it, if you remember tough issues that hit you back in the day as a teenager, things like drugs and sex or violence sort of issues, well, that was muskets. Today, kids are being hit with machine guns because of the incessant bombardment of what goes on the screens. And it is very, very powerful bombardment. 2 examples that we came up with, because everybody said, can it really affect kids? Yes, very much so. The AMA did a big study, landmark study, about why kids start smoking cigarettes. Now, kids are overall smoking less cigarettes, which is okay, but while I'm thinking of it, they're vaping more. And we now know that vaping leads to cigarette smoking, which leads to marijuana smoking, which leads to other things. These are all gateways. So the vaping is a disaster. It cannot be allowed. You just can't let kids do that. Again, why? The reward circuits. They're hyperactive, and they love the vaping. They become addicted very, very quickly to that. And then the vaping stops paying off, and they move to the real thing. Well, anyway, we did a study. Why do kids start smoking cigarettes? And they found out that the greatest predictor of a kid starting to smoke cigarettes is how many times they saw a screen figure smoke a cigarette. They controlled for all the other factors, parents who smoke, socioeconomic class, peers who smoke, all that stuff. It was how many screen images they saw of smoking that lit up that desire to try cigarette smoking. So what they see does affect their behavior. How about what they hear? Another study was done, again at AMA, looking at sexual violence with young women. They were, at the time, just women, but boys are also exposed to this. And they found a direct correlation between sexual violence and the amount of sexually violent lyrics, misogynist lyrics, aggressive, terrible lyrics, that the girls and the boys listened to. 2.7 times greater incident of sexual violence among kids who have heard those lyrics. Guys, teen brains are soft. They're not defended. You would hear those lyrics and be horrified. Kids listen to the lyrics and they're like, wow, that's unusual. And they kind of immerse themselves in this stuff, and it burns in the circuits of the brain. And they are acting out these behaviors they are exposed to. Third set of stress that we're seeing, third source, is drugs. Drug use is also something you've had a lot of education on, I assume. You've had some great programs here. But the short course is that we have an upside-down hockey stick, that over the past several decades we had this incredible increase, and then it leveled off and it's hanging about the same, up and down. We get some good news, but then it turns out bad news is because they're just shifting to another drug. We think, for example, that booze is down. Kids are drinking less, and everybody's cheering about that. But marijuana has exploded among the kids. And by the way, the vaping is often marijuana. You don't know it because they use oils in the vaping devices, and some of the vaping devices look like pens. And that's what the kids are doing in school, is smoking marijuana. And the oils that they use can be anywhere from 3 to 9 times as potent as a weed back in your day. They should rename marijuana. It's a different drug. It's unfair to just call it weed because it's a super drug, and it has much more powerful impact than we ever realized. And it's just at the time where we are decriminalizing and legalizing it. Guess what that means to teenagers? This is safe, not a problem. And they'll come and argue with you with research that says, see, weed doesn't hurt anybody. They've done all these studies. 2 things. One, in my day, it was cigarettes. And remember the 7 dwarfs? You should punch that. The cigarette manufacturers, the presidents, the owners, CEOs, got up and lied before Congress, saying these are not addictive. They didn't know there's no science that said it was addictive. The SOBs were manipulating the nicotine content and using other things like menthol to make them more powerfully addicted. They were lying. That's where the huge settlement came from with the tobacco companies. Same thing's going on with weed. Now, is weed okay for adults to smoke? I actually don't know a lot about the science of weed in adults. I suspect it's the same as with alcohol. I think it's relatively the same risk. But guys, teenagers can't use these neuroaddictive substances. That's alcohol, weed, any of the other drugs. They cannot use them. How do we know that? Well, one, we've actually got pictures, MRIs of the brain changes, structural changes in the brain in the reward circuits when kids do smoke. So we can see that the brain is actually reconfigured. You all know about fetal alcohol syndrome. When a woman is pregnant, they say, don't drink, not even one drink. We can't find a lower limit of safe alcohol use in later stages of gestation because that alcohol just gets right into the baby and causes terrible things. Same thing with weed with teenagers. Guys, when a baby is in the last couple of months of development, that's when the brain is actually growing inside the fetus, just like the brain is growing inside your teenager's head. It is that fragile. And whatever hits it will have tremendous impact, much more so than in an adult brain. The second thing that tells us that teens cannot use any of these substances is just numbers. Bear with me on this. Picture a group of 25 kids, and they all get together, and they decide, we're going to start smoking and drinking regularly, which we define as once a week or more. So of those 25 kids, if they have this decision at age 21, you got it? 25, 21-year-olds get together, say, hey, we're 21, let's start using. They didn't use before to any significant degree. Of those 25 kids, one will become an addict to some substance. Addiction is defined as it takes over their life. They lose everything. They live to do the drug. That could be heroin. Increasingly it is. It could be methamphetamine. It could be cocaine. It could be a bunch of things. So 1 out of the 25 will become an addict. Okay. What about a group of 18-year-olds? Of 25 18-year-olds, 3 will become full-blown addicts. What about at age 16? Of 25 16-year-olds, 6 will become addicts. And what about at age 14, where increasingly we're seeing it bubble down to that age that kids start smoking and or drinking at age 14 or lower. Of a group of 25 14-year-olds, 17 of them will become addicts. You got that? It couldn't be any plainer. The younger somebody starts using this stuff, they're rewiring their brain and setting it up to be predisposed to addiction. And this is where I'm going to end up having people yell at me because they're going to say things like, well, I smoked a little bit and I drank a little bit back in the day. Your numbers must be off. It's a different world. First, in terms of potency, again, the weed is so much more potent than it was back in the day. And second, drinking, I thought we were bad back in the day. We would steal a couple beers, God forbid the old man found out, and drink them in the park. Today, when a kid says, yeah, I was drinking, you know what they're talking about? Running shots. Drinking until no offense, they call it drinking until I'm retarded. They binge drink, 6 shots or more. And they do that 1, 2, 3 nights a week. And those are the good kids because they're not doing heavy drugs. Oh, Dr. Bradley, I don't do drugs. I just get drunk 2 or 3 times a week. It's a drug. So this is the missing piece of the opioid crisis. Why is that? Everybody's focused on the drugs are being overprescribed, and Big Pharma was conning people, saying everything was safe with opioids, and that's all true, I think, anyway. But they missed the key piece. What is the key piece? It has to do with reward circuit damage by parents being laid back with our kids smoking and drinking as teenagers. Here's the way it works. If you call this the baseline of where your neurotransmitters should be, so if your baseline is here, you're doing okay. Like you go out in the morning, beautiful day, glad I'm alive, right? Like, wow, cool, you get a little payoff. When kids use, when teenagers use, they get an explosion of the feel-good chemical, an avalanche, to the point that the brain says we're overdosed, and the brain shuts down their own production system for the reward. Then as they come down, they don't stop at baseline. They start go a little bit below baseline. If they use again, within a week, they shoot back up, but they don't go quite to where they got up the first time. And when they come down, they don't stop at baseline, they don't stop at the prior bottom, they go a little bit lower. So what are we talking about? A descending roller coaster, where kids then smoke more and more to try to just get back up to baseline. Kids will come into my office and say, I smoke 5 times a day, I'm sick, I'm broke, my girlfriend dumped me, my teeth are yellow, I hate this, but I can't function anymore. And this is weed, that drug that doesn't addict people. Well, when they're down here, they either quit, good luck with that, because that's a hell to try to get through, because it can take up to a year for the reward circuits to come back online. We call that no man's land. And that's where I'm just like pleading with kids, hang in there, hang in there. I guarantee that beautiful morning will come back to you, but you gotta hang in there. And how do you ask a teenager to do that? Adults can't do it. In any event, then they get the magic moment. If they don't get sober, a friend says, hey, why don't you try one of these pills? Bang, they find Jesus. They're just, oh my God. And they start on another descending roller coaster. They move on to the next drug and the next drug. The last train stop is heroin. Train Spotting, the movie, check it out. It's heroin. And that is the last stop on that train. So what is the missing piece, guys? We are the pushers. We have been asleep at the helm by being cool with kids doing weed and booze on weekends. They're changing their brains. They're being predisposed to addiction. Why did we suddenly have an opioid addiction? Do you know that opioids have been around forever? You know that? Yeah. When you were young, you may have gotten opioids. I got hurt in the military. You know, they put me on opioids, and I was like, ugh, you know, I hate this stuff. I feel stupid and get sick. I don't like this. My brain wasn't pre-wired to react to opioids. Our kids often are. And when they hit that opioid, they have the magical experience. It's nirvana. You ever talk to a heroin addict? You should talk to a heroin addict, because they say life can't compete. Watch the movie Train Spotting. It's all there. So this is where I believe 55 to 60% of the opioid epidemic came from. And nobody wants to talk about it because it makes us uncomfortable. And then I have arguments with parents, as I just had last week in a very nice area, and a woman said, well, if I tell my daughter she can't smoke weed, she won't have any friends. If I tell my daughter she can't smoke weed, she won't have any friends. How can I do that? So I asked her, well, a little bit about the family. And then I said, do you have fire insurance? And she said, yeah. And I said, okay, why do you have fire insurance? She said, it would be a catastrophe if the house burned down. And I said, yeah, absolutely. Do you know what the odds are that a house might burn down? She said, no, and I actually looked it up. Turns out it was 20%. And I was guessing. I said, maybe it's 10%, 20%. But let's just assume it's 20%. You think it's wise to pay out all that money? She said, absolutely. And I said, based on your genetic history and what you're telling me about your daughter's use, she's got about a 25% odd of becoming an addict. Is that not a catastrophe? Isn't this something you do draw the line in the sand for and say, sorry, you can't use? People say, you can't really stop it. Yes, you can. You have the power. And I'm not talking about the power that you may think you have of searches and drug tests and so forth. All that stuff may be necessary, and if you read the books, we lay it all out in terms of how you address kids' drug use. But you know what the most powerful tool in your arsenal is? Saying to your kid lovingly, firmly, that you disagree with their use of drugs and you intend to not allow it to happen, that you have a loving expectation they will not use until they're age 21. A loving expectation. You start with, honey, I love you. It's my expectation you will not use until you're 21. I love you. This stuff could take you out. And kids will bitch and moan, but you hang firm on that. That turns out to be the most powerful deterrent factor we have. Parents who are kind of nice about everything else, go crazy over the room and the smelly shoes and all that stuff and the mess in the sink. But boy, you stand up suddenly, all business, when drugs come in the picture and say, this is not going to happen on my watch. Not going to happen. It's not screaming. It's not making them afraid. It's actually going after their belief system. When my son Ross went off to college, I did the thing. I said, Ross, I'm so proud of you. This is great. Just to let you know, it's my expectation you will not drink until you're 21. He said, Dad, you know what goes on at college. I said, yeah, unfortunately I do. I'm telling you, son, I love you. I know a lot about this stuff. It's my expectation that you will not drink. I'll take you out for your first beer at 21. Until then, I'll do everything I can to stop it. Do not come home with beer. Do not bring kids home and drink in my house. It's just not going to happen. And he kind of laughed. And then at age 25, he said, by the way, Dad, remember that talk we had? And I said, yeah. He said, you spoiled my high. I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, the beer was flowing, and I couldn't get your voice out of my head. He said, I couldn't get into it. You spoiled my high. And boy, did that make my day. Yeah. He actually left campus. My son, by the way, is like this. He's, athlete, incredible, chiseled, tattooed, long hair, heavy metal musician, also a school teacher. He ain't no altar boy. And he left college because it was so out of control. He said it's just nuts. They start drinking Thursday at noon, and they keep drinking into Sunday. They don't even clean the bathrooms because there's no point because of the puke all over the place. So my heavy metal son said, wow, you guys are too crazy for me, and booked out of there. How does that happen? The drinking rates at college have exploded. Why? I already told you. Because we said it's okay, smoke a little weed with your friends and be popular and all like that. That is the enemy that we're dealing with. And you can become the rescuer with a simple attitude to start with. Let's see where we are time-wise. Do I have more? Can I push on? A couple of other things you need to know that are different about your kids' world. One, we have a lot of data where we compared kids over 50 years with the same tests that we've used for 50 years, and there's some stunning differences. One, your kid feels little control over the outcome of her life. How could that be? We were so stunned by this because you give them everything, right? In my day, we didn't have much. Today, most of the kids in areas like this have way too much. So how could they feel no control? But it's true. They feel that they are unable to direct the outcome of their lives. I remember being young, a teenager, and kids were talking about what we were going to do. That if we weren't stupid, we didn't hold up the 7-Eleven and all like that, we could get out of the hood. We felt there was a path. Kids today feel it's a crapshoot. Second thing that's changed, their goals are now extrinsic and materialistic. We have these tests where we would say essentially to kids, what is it about? What's the point of existence? Back in the day, believe it or not, most teenagers would say things like, I want to do something important. I want to change lives. I want to be a cop. I want to be an army officer. I want to be a school teacher, whatever. I want to do something. Well, guess what kids respond mostly today by saying? I want to have a 4-car garage. I want to have all the exotic cars. I want to have lots of women, lots of money. He who dies with the most toys wins. Their goals have gone extrinsic and materialistic. That's a recipe for depression because it ain't no happy life. It's not a fulfilling life. They're less spontaneous and inner-directed. Why? We take charge of their lives. We run them from one structured activity to the next. They're not negotiating. They're not out in the street trying to figure out the rules of a game that nobody understands. When I grew up in our playground was a dump behind the house, no joke, in Southwest Philadelphia. Boy, it was a little dangerous. I don't recommend it. But you learn a lot. You learn how to navigate. You learn how to handle the bully and the crazy and the dangerous stuff by getting a little dangerous, by not being supervised, by being thrown in unstructured activities. When your kid says, as my son did, he wants to have a rock and roll band and try to do that in the summer instead of going for the Johns Hopkins Summer Science Enrichment Program, do the rock and roll band. We've measured it. He'll learn more doing a rock and roll band. Think about it. It's managing personnel, negotiating, doing motivational things, all the headaches and trying to get a band to work. What happens at Johns Hopkins? We hand you a syllabus. Please memorize that. Here's the test, nicely done, go away. There's no creativity. There's no open field running. And that's how we've lost that particular piece that has to do with resilience. Finally, they're much less self-reliant. Why? I touched on it before. We don't let them fail. We think we should insulate them from failure. That's a disaster. When Ross was 13, he came home and he announced that he was in a gifted whatever social studies program. He said, I'm not going to do social studies. I just want to let you know I will not participate in the class because I've been reading, and social studies is a mind control program by the government. This is history written by rich white men, and I will not participate in that. And Cindy, who's a teacher, she's also an ex-therapist, my wife, looked at each other and she kind of winked. We said, okay, cool. Hey, you're a young man, you're a good kid, and you want to make that decision, go ahead. And he looked at us like, you're okay if I don't participate. I said, absolutely. But just to let you know, if and when the teacher calls up, we're going to hand the phone to you, right? Does that work out? He said, yeah, absolutely. Well, of course, we had the meeting at the end of the semester. The teacher, I'll never forget, he had the shadows like 9 o'clock at night, and he was exhausted. His tie's down, and he's behind the desk. He's a real neat guy. And he said, I need to talk to you about the grade for your son, Ross. And Cindy and I looked at each other and said, okay. And I said, what's the problem? And he said, well, if I did it by the numbers, he would be getting an F. And he looked down. And we looked at each other and we said, okay, you didn't have to call us in for this. And he said, you're okay if I give your son an F? I said, absolutely. He put his pencil down and he slid his chair back and he crossed his arms and he said, I've been teaching here for 9 years. We're in a district like this. We pay the teachers real well. And it's, one of those areas. And he said, 9 years, you're the first set of parents that did not argue for a better grade for their kid. And I said, look, we moved here because we want really high quality teachers, which means if my kid earns an A, give him an A. If he earns an F, give him the F. Because he needs to figure this stuff out. It's great to make a stand, but if you're going to make a stand, you're going to do civil disobedience, you get arrested. You go to jail. You pay the price. Doesn't mean it's a bad thing to do. You got to pay the price. I'm not going to bail you out. Well, Ross got the F. And when he heard he was getting the F, he stayed up the whole weekend, day before the last day of this semester, and he wrote this amazing paper defending his position that social studies was a mind control program written by rich white men. It was very impressive, and he gave it to the social studies guy. And the social studies guy said, Ross, this is fantastic. Ross, this is really well done. I would like to submit it to this publisher because I'm that impressed. And Ross said, oh, I get an A then? And he said, no, you get an F. I didn't ask for this. I asked for this stuff. Ross was a straight A student in college. Guys, if you don't let them fail, they don't learn. You're just postponing some horrendous day later. Could be 25, could be 35, could be 45, I don't know. And they don't know how to respond to failure. They haven't acquired the skills and the assets because we can deprive them of that. What's it doing to our kids? Bad news time. Anxiety, depression, and suicide are all epidemic levels among teenagers because of what we've gone over. Since 1952 to 2016, the suicide rate in the general population has increased 78%, which alone is like, wow, what's going on there? Guys, with teenagers, the suicide rate has increased 500% in that same time period. What is going on? I already told you. We take kids who have these brain challenges, we put them in a world that hyperstimulates them and attacks them and stresses them, and then we're surprised that they burn out and they don't want to live anymore, and that the drugs look great to them and do great things for them, because they're typically medicating themselves for these diseases of anxiety, stress, and suicidal thinking. A kid this week told me, yeah, I do that drug. I do it so I don't kill myself, because I know if I wasn't using the drug, I would kill myself. And these are children. So, what's the final factor? Us as parents aren't doing such a good job. Why is that? Well, we're sad and we're confused. Why are we sad? We're sad because we lost our little child. Remember these creatures when they were 4 years old? You remember those days? I do. I remember them every day. I used to come home when Ross was 4, dealing with this stuff, like, we lost another kid in the school today. And then Ross would come running across the floor, Daddy, Daddy, Daddy. Remember that stuff? And he would jump in my arms, and he would give me a hug that I can feel today. It was incredible. So connecting, accepting, unconditional. Remember those hugs? God, I love those. And I'd sit him on my lap, and I'd muss up his hair, tickle him up, those magic moments. Remember that? See, this is where the women are all starting to tear up. And the men are shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Yeah, I used to like to sniff his head. Remember? They had that sweet, thank you. The men never admit that. He sniffs his kid's head, weirdo, No, they did. They had that sweet smell on the top of their head. I should look that up. But in any event, I loved those moments. And then, as I told you, at 13, I had this massive stroke nobody told me about, and he absolutely hated me. So then I kept reaching out to him, but he's like sarcastic. I say, hey, how about if we get a coffee? No. Why not? He says, like somebody might see me there with you. I said, okay. All right, I'll catch you later. And I walk away saying, you little son of a bitch, asked me for the car keys one day, And I walk away mad, but I'm actually hurt. I'm grieving. I'm sad for the loss of the child. You have to acknowledge that, guys. You have to acknowledge that chapter's over. Sorry. There's a great chapter coming. And this is where that baby becomes an adult, and likely an amazing adult. That's a real miracle. So you got to hang in there because they need you now more than ever before. A lot of parents, sorry, but mostly us dads, cut them loose. Well, he's a pain in the butt, he's on his own, he's done parenting, the hell with him. And we do it out of anger, but that's the time where they need us more than ever before because of all the stuff they're going through. They're just tough to be around. And the books give you lots of, great tips on trying to connect with kids there's one called How You Hug a Porcupine. And it's a great title. And it gives you all the tricks you need to try to hug that porcupine. The second thing is we're confused. We don't know how to respond to this stuff because we're coming from a whole different paradigm of how to accomplish the mission of raising children. Most of us were raised in a fear-based model that if you did something bad, you got punished. And so we tend to kind of move in that direction, but today we don't beat kids. See, punishment, if a kid keeps standing up, the ultimate response is you smack him in the face. That's the way it used to be. By the way, my father was one of those. He was not a bad father. That was a good father who cared, who was engaged enough to beat up his son. As crazy as it sounds, that was like, okay. That was certainly the Irish way. I think it was a lot of different ways back in the day. Today we don't do that in the physical sense as a rule, but we will do it in other ways by using punishments instead of using consequences or respect-based techniques. Give you a couple stories that illustrate the difference. When I was 1967, I was in my father's basement, as he defined it, with my gangster friends, as he referred to them, and we were listening to the devil's music. Anybody want to guess what the devil's music was in 67? Nobody ever guessed. Not the Beatles, not the Stones, not Black Sabbath, Grateful Dead, Beach Boys, no. I still haven't heard. It's amazing. Not Simon and Garfunkel. You give up? The Doors. See, you're confused because all you hear now is the, Goldie oldie little love ditties they did. They did those to pay for their drugs and their women. The Doors were a sick bunch of puppies. If you don't know, go home and punch up the lyrics to The End. Read them carefully. Not going to say any more. Anyway, my father was ahead of his time. He was worried about the cultural impact of this electronic device on our young brains. Came downstairs with a cigar in his mouth, picked up the album, remember albums? Smashes it on a record player, which is a great parenting technique. It's like shrapnel, puts a cigar back in his mouth and he blows smoke in our wide-eyed faces. And back then, the old man was 8 foot, 20 inches tall or something. Remember how big the old man used to look? And he puts the cigar back in his mouth and he towers over us with his hands on his hips. waiting for somebody to be dumb enough to say something, and nobody was because of the neighborhood rule. Anybody's parent could beat up anybody's kid back then. Seriously, I got a lump, it never went away. A Polish lady hit me with a pan for cursing. I didn't know she understood English, but apparently she knew those words. That's all true. In any event, so was that an effective parenting technique? You could argue yes. Weirdly enough, how could it be effective? Do you know what an album cost in 1967 to kids in Southwest Philadelphia? We were poor by today's standards. I didn't feel poor. I had a great time. But it was one pair of shoes, nobody had a car, that kind of thing. Albums, we had begged, borrowed, and stolen to buy this album. And the record player, a kid stole from his older sister. That was a whole other tragedy. So my father had successfully policed our environment. Because nobody else had the album. They weren't playing those cuts on the radio. Did you know that? There used to be things called decency laws. They had this crazy, archaic, conservative, ultra right-wing thing about, maybe kids shouldn't hear this stuff. Maybe it could influence their thinking. So they would ban certain songs. And I know we can't go there, civil libertarians, I get it. However, it worked back in that day. So tonight you go home and you hear your daughter listening to a horrendous MP3 song, and you grab it and delete it. What will she do? Download it and 10 more that are worse. Yeah. And you're never going to know about it because she's better at hiding her files than you are. She's a tech genius. She grew up punching buttons. She knows how this stuff works. She's always going to be ahead of you. It doesn't work. Guys, that's fighting, Afghanistan with the rules from Vietnam. It's not going to work. You have to adapt to the new terrain, the new enemy. So what do we suggest you do? Use respect-based techniques. What's that look like? Travel ahead in time. 2004, my son is in my basement with his gangster friends listening to horrible music. I know it's horrible because the whole house shakes, goes boom, 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 and the guys are going, hey. So I go downstairs, of course, CD player, remember CDs? Shuts off, and they're in dead silence. These guys are really slick, going, I say, gentlemen, we need to turn that back on. They look at each other, and I say, well, I'm not taking your CD, and I don't even want to know whose it is. The price you'll pay is, we're going to listen to it together, okay? And we turn it on, and sure enough, there's an artist that said a bunch of things, I'll spare you. But the interesting thing was that he told me and these boys, women like to get beaten up. Yeah, women enjoy that, according to the song. The cheery refrain was, they scream and they squeal, they plead and they beg. I may have it a little, but essentially that. But she loves it. Oh, she pleads, screams, she begs, but she loves it, she loves it, she loves it. I click off the CD player. I said, gentlemen, do you think women like to get beaten up? And they're like, what are you asking us that? It's a stupid question. I said, well, you guys are listening to this. Do you think that what you listen to or stuff you see can affect your behavior? What do you think about that? Nah. And I said, so what you see can't put thoughts in your head, right? Absolutely. So I'll be right back. And I ran upstairs. You can get all this online, by the way. I was teaching a class at the time, and I had that cigarette study. Look at this, guys. Kids who see lots of on-screen smoking have 3 times the rate of smoking initiation than kids that don't. Well, that's just smoking. That's stupid. Nothing will make a guy beat up a girl. Really? I'll be right back. I came with another graph that showed, and by the way, it's amazing, that as those lyrics have exploded, the misogynist, violent, beat her up, stuff her in the trunk, all that stuff, as those lyrics have gone up, almost a direct correlation with violence against women, young women in particular. Almost, we never get those kind of correlations. Like, oh my God, it jumped off the chart at us when we plotted it. So look at this, guys. As these lyrics, like the one you're listening to, this violence is happening. It could happen to Susie down the street, the girl that's a great soccer player. You guys think she's like one of the guys? Yeah, she's at a tremendous risk. And by the way, the latest numbers are more than half of America's women can expect to be sexually assaulted before age 25. More than half. This is another epidemic. So it's crazy, off the charts. So Ross, when I would do these things, this respect-based parenting, he hated it. One time he said, why don't you just punch me in the face and get it over with? He did. I said, Ross, I would love to punch you in the face and get it over with, but, it would just enrage and humiliate you in front of your friends and make that idiot on your CD player your new hero. I said to the guys, if I get tough with you, I'm going to lose ground. In the military, the best lesson I ever learned is don't start a fight you can't win. It's a bad idea. So I can't win the fight with your culture, and you should use that word with your kids. I can't win that. White flag, I give up. Your culture is over my walls. It's through my wire. The only thing I can do is boogie out of here and figure out another way to win. But I have to get out of that battle because there's no point. Gentlemen, I said to these boys, I can't control what you see and hear. I care about what you think about what you see and what you hear. And on that note, I've invited Ross's mother downstairs to explain to us from a female perspective as to whether women like to get beaten up. Now they're going, What am I doing? I can't control them. I can't control the world. Neither can you. Instead of controlling them, I go after their beliefs. I ask them questions. I don't lecture. I ask them questions. Do you think this could be connected? Even if they respond sarcastically, I know the question is in there. So doing respect-based parenting is like guerrilla warfare. You run up to your opponent's wall and you hurl a hand grenade over and you run the hell away. You don't stand there and slug it out. You just lob in the thought. And it will stay in their heads and they will think about it. And the second thing you do is you model the behaviors. You let them see how you think about things. They are listening and watching and drinking in who you are. How do you handle conflicts with your spouse, your partner? How do you handle it when the jerk cuts you off in the parking lot? What do? They are watching and learning more from what we do than what we say. And they learn more from our questions of them than they do from our lectures to them. Okay? The only time you exert the control is when it comes to something that's life-threatening, such as drugs. And as usual, I have talked too much. We have, I'm going to have to retreat to, there's handouts. You may have gotten them tonight. They may be in the lobby, or you can just write to me if you didn't get it. 2 sets of handouts. One is called the 7 C's of Resilience. You can go to my website and you'll get that. And that where it lists a specific set of strategies that you can employ to build those 7 assets with kids towards resilience. The second handout, which I think you have, is the 10 Commandments of Parenting. And the 10 Commandments are the tactics, day to day. What do you do to express these things that build resilience in your kids? So those are the handouts. Please study those and then write me with any questions you have. The first commandment is the key, which is be as a dispassionate cop unto thy child and adolescence. What's that mean? Well, you can get tickets from, I'm sure our police here are wonderful people, but cops sometimes get angry back in Philly where I'm from. If you don't know any angry cops, I'll introduce you to a couple. But think about, you go through a stop sign and you get intimidated by the police officer. He's in a bad mood, spotlight in your face, sarcastic, throws a ticket in the window, says, lady, I'm going to keep you here. I'm going to teach you a lesson. I know you're late for work. Too bad. You can't go through stop signs. So then when you get home, what do you tell your partner about? Yeah, the cop, you're going to write a letter. He can't do this stuff. You're in a rage. The next day, you come to the stop sign, you blow through it again. Another cop pulls you over, but his delivery is a little different. He says, ma'am, you can't go through stop signs. I see you're a teacher at the school. I'll get you out of here as soon as I can. And he goes back, comes back with a ticket, hands you the same ticket, same point, same fine. And he says, ma'am, about every 6 months I get to pick up body parts at this intersection. It's really dangerous. Please slow down. It is better to get there late than not get there at all. I hope the rest of your day is better than this. Hands you the ticket and walks away. Who are you mad at? Got it? It's a difference between punishment and consequence. Punishment is you do something bad and I hurt you. I scare you. I take away stuff you love. You're grounded until you're 43, that kind of stuff. Punishments makes kids in a rage because they had no control. You made up the fine after they did the crime. Consequence is a whole other animal. That's where you say, look, you're going to the sleepover. I'm a little worried about these away sleepovers, but I'll tell you what. If you don't do any drinking and so forth, then you've earned the next sleepover. But I just want to let you know, if you do drink, we're going to be retiring sleepovers for a while. Nothing personal, but you're telling me you're not ready for that level of freedom. So what? I can't go to sleepovers? No, have them here, honey. Have them in our house. I'll buy the pizza, I'll get the movies. And she says, well, they won't come to our house. And I said, well, why is that? Why is that, sweetheart? You all got the drill? If you're going to get angry, that diverts from the message. Set up the consequence, they make a bad choice, they pay the price, they get mad at themselves. Now I'm going to shut up until the end where I wrap, and you guys had do you want to do Q&A now, or?
No, after the survey.
I'm sorry, the survey? Okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Bradley. That was absolutely wonderful.
Oh, we're not done. I'll be
really
back.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. You know, and whilst I'm thanking Dr. Bradley, I'd also really like to extend our thanks to the school working group of Community in Crisis. They worked countless hours and devoted so much time to the smallest details for many, many months now to make tonight and tomorrow night come true, headed up by our fearless leader, Heather Athanasiou. So thank you so very much to them for making this happen. So now's the time to test our technological ability. We're going to switch to text polling. Text polling really helps us gauge the effectiveness of our programming. No pressure, Mike.
And just to let you know, I have about 10 minutes to wrap up after this. So
okay, great.
Something important I want to hit you with.
All right, good.